Hello everyone, today I'll be reviewing High Noon. So High Noon is a western and it was directed by Fred Zinnemann, stars Gary Cooper and Grace Kelly, and it came out in 1952. In this film we see Gary Cooper plays a marshal in a small town, and the name of the marshal is Will Kane. And right at the start of the film we see Will Kane get married to Grace Kelly's character Amy. And so they've just had the wedding and about to go off and leave town when news of some men arriving in town means that Will Kane has to reconsider and is thinking about staying in town in order to stop these men from causing trouble. And the men that are arriving in town, there's three guys and there's another guy called Frank Miller. And Frank Miller was someone who Will Kane arrested and put away, he was meant to be hanged for murder, but circumstances meant that he wasn't hanged and he went to prison. So he's recently just been released from prison and is now coming back to the town to cause trouble for Will Kane. Now, one of the interesting things about this film is that it is pretty much filmed in real time. So, what I mean by that is that the events of the film take place over roughly 105 minutes and the film itself is 85 minutes long. So there are a few bits where maybe the time isn't exactly correct as we're seeing it, but most of the time the events of the film are happening exactly as we see it. So if there's one scene which is taking place and 10 minutes later, might be a different scene and it'll be taking place exactly 10 minutes after the previous scene. And this is shown to us by the clock, which a lot of the time the camera and the characters are looking at the clock, particularly Will Kane, to wait for noon. And at noon is the time that the train is arriving and Frank Miller is meant to be arriving in town. So the film starts off roughly just after 10:30 in the morning and then leading up to noon. And then, when Frank Miller is arriving and is going to be causing some trouble. So what this film is very good at, it's very good at creating tension. We're constantly building up to this moment at the end where there's supposed to be this big showdown between Will Kane and Frank Miller. And throughout the film, basically, Will Kane, he goes around town trying to recruit some members and some deputies to help protect the town and fight against Frank Miller and his gang. And Will Kane has a lot of trouble with this because a lot of the townsfolk, they're worried about protecting their wives and kids, and they almost see it as a suicide mission. And it turns out that Will Kane realizes that if he wants to protect the town from Frank Miller, he's going to have to do it all by himself. Now, Gary Cooper is very good in this role. He plays a really sort of worn out, beaten, older, haggard-looking guy who's maybe had a lot of experience and wants a bit of a break, but realizes no, he has to do the right thing and he has to stay in town and protect it. Grace Kelly is also very good in this film. This was one of her first on-screen appearances, one of her first major roles. Ironically, Grace Kelly actually thought that she didn't do a very good performance in this film, but she did go on to star in a few other big films as well, particularly with Alfred Hitchcock, such as Rear Window and Dial M for Murder. I should also say that Lloyd Bridges does very well in this role in this film. This is one of his earlier appearances as well. And he plays, in some ways, a similar character to Gary Cooper's character, Will Kane, although a slightly more uncertain, reckless character. And we also get an early appearance from Lee Van Cleef as one of Frank Miller's men. And Lee Van Cleef obviously went into star of lots of other westerns, such as For a Few Dollars More and The Good, the Bad and the Ugly. In my honest opinion, this probably isn't one of my favourite westerns. And in terms of a traditional western film like The Searchers, which I love as a film, this film is not your traditional western. And it's not a traditional western in the sense that we don't see any Indians and we don't see the big epic landscapes like the frontier and the desert scenery. We don't really get any of that in this film because most of the film just takes place in this small town, so it feels very concentrated, and it's not actually a very action-packed film either. There's not many shootouts at all, except towards the end of the film where it builds up towards this shootout at the end, because obviously as you're watching a film, you're constantly looking forward to that and you're waiting for that to happen. Although this film gets away with it because it creates attention, so it's not necessarily a bad thing that there's not lots of shootouts, and it's not a traditional Western in that sense, but this film gets away with it because it's very good at building up the tension and creating this atmosphere where we as the audience are on the edge of our seats and want to see what happens. You want to see where the plot is going. Some people might find this film a little bit slow paced because if you are expecting an action-packed Western, like I say, this isn't your typical action-packed Western, but I do say give it a chance because it might not be your traditional Western. I think it's a very well made film. This film was nominated for quite a few Oscars. Gary Cooper won the Oscar for Best Actor for this film, which I think is well deserved, and also won the Oscar for Best Original Song, Do Not Forsake Me, Oh My Darling, which you'll hear quite a lot throughout the film in the background. It was also nominated for Best Picture, but it didn't win the Best Picture Oscar because that went to Cecil B. DeMille's The Greatest Show on Earth. So yeah, in my opinion, I think it's a very good film. I don't think it's a perfect film. I can say that it is a little bit slow paced, although ironically the film isn't actually that long. It's only 85 minutes long, 1 hour 25 minutes. So definitely in terms of Western, it's fairly short, but it's very good at creating drama and tension and just creating an atmosphere with these characters that we can all be part of. And ironically, in this film, we as the audience probably want to be more like Will Kane, because Will Kane is a character who's been very noble and loyal to his town when most of the other townsfolk aren't. And really with most people, we would probably be more like the townsfolk, in which we would not want to risk our lives to protect our town if we didn't have to. But Will Kane feels it's the right thing to do. He sees all these people turning their backs on their town and saying that I don't think it's worth it. They just want to see what happens. But Will Kane, he's a perfect heroic character who wants to protect his town and do the right thing at all costs, no matter what. I'm going to say this isn't necessarily the kind of film that I'd want to watch again and again. I've only seen it twice. I do think it's a good watch and I would recommend it to most people, but I'm going to give it a rating of 8 out of 10 because I think it's a good Western, though not your traditional Western, though definitely a Western which everyone should try and watch and see what they think of it. So there we go. So that is High Noon. Have you guys seen it? Do you like it? Do you dislike it? Please let me know in the comments what you think and let me know whether you liked High Noon. So thank you all very much for watching. I'll see you in the next video. Take care.